So welcome to our second session with panelists entitled Practice. My name is Lisa Mahar. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology here at Berkeley, and I will be chairing this session. Please excuse the lingering cough. I have a toddler in daycare, so many of you probably know how that goes, but I will muddle through here with this voice. So just to give you an idea of the game plan for this afternoon's session, we'd like to continue with many of the themes that were brought up this morning. However, perhaps pivoting the perspective a little bit to focus, as the session is entitled, on practice. So talking about stakeholders and practitioners in cultural heritage, cultural heritage management and preservation. We also expand our geographical focus in the Middle East a little bit to include also North Africa and many other countries beyond Syria and Egypt that we focused on mainly up until this point today. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. You can see we have quite a number more than we did this morning. So we're going to have a little bit of a different focus. Rather than listen to kind of presentations from each of our panelists, we would like to have this session led mostly by discussion and have a lot of audience involvement. So we've actually asked our speakers not to prepare anything really ahead of time, just to talk a little bit about their own research under the guise of the questions that either myself or you as the audience members may ask. However, we have three panelists who are going to show a little bit of visuals to go along with some of the issues having to do with practice and cultural heritage. So after my introductions, we'll start with those three panelists, and then we will open it up to the floor for questions. So I will start immediately here on my right with Dr. Michael Harrower, who is an assistant professor of archaeology in the Department of Near Eastern Studies at Johns Hopkins University. Michael's research concentrates on long-term histories from the beginnings of agriculture through the rise and decline of ancient states across southern Arabia and the Horn of Africa. His current fieldwork in Oman and Ethiopia includes a 3-year NASA-funded study of long-term water histories of early civilizations using a combination of archaeological exploration and satellite imagery analysis. His new out next month book entitled Water Histories and Spatial Archaeology, Ancient Yemen and the American West examines the spatial, political, environmental role of water and irrigation in the long-term histories of arid regions. This book concentrates in part on the long-standing categorization of civilizations into Eastern and Western types, which understates commonalities while rationalizing and propelling violent conflict. His current fieldwork in both Oman and Ethiopia uses a combination of archaeological survey and satellite imagery analysis. In Ethiopia, investigations have recently concentrated on pre-Aksumite through late Aksumite settlement patterns and excavations of a newly discovered ancient town of Beta Samadi. In Oman, recent research has involved wide-ranging archaeological survey and 3D modeling of a megalithic Bronze Age tower monument that dates to approximately 2400 BC. Our second panelist, Mursheen Aliyari. Mursheen is a new media artist, art activist, educator, and occasional curator. She was born and raised in Iran and moved to the United States in 2007. Her work deals extensively with the political, social, and cultural contradictions we face every day. She thinks about technology as a philosophical toolset to reflect on objects, a poetic means to document the personal and collective lives we live, and our struggles as humans in the 21st century. Mursheen has been part of numerous exhibitions, festivals, and workshops around the world. She has been an artist in residence at CMU Studio for Creative Inquiry, Autodesk Pier 9 Workshop in San Francisco, and Banff Center, among others. Her work has been featured in the Huffington Post, NPR, Vice, Parkit Art Magazine, Rhizome, Hyperallergenic, Art F City, Creators Project, Days Digital, Neuro Magazine, Global Voices Online, and Al Jazeera, among many others. Mursheen is the co-founder of the Experimental Research Lab at Pier 9/Autodesk. Our third panelist is Dr. Surur Ghanimadi. Surur received her PhD from the Department of Near Eastern Studies at the University of California, Berkeley in 2001. Her area of specialty is the material culture of the Near East, Iran, Central Asia, and North Africa, from late antiquity through the medieval Islamic era. She is, at the same time, a practicing architect and a conservator, with more than 20 years of experience, primarily in preservation and restoration of historic buildings and objects. She has served as a research fellow and lecturer at the University of California, Berkeley, and Merced. In addition, she has served as a consultant for UNESCO's cluster offices in Tehran, Iran, with reference to studies pertaining to conservation and seismic methods that are particular to the mud brick monuments of this area. She has participated in numerous field studies and excavations, functioning as both an architect and historian. Moreover, she has published several important articles regarding the monuments of Khawaja, most recently in Encyclopedia Iranica. As an architect and a conservator, she's been particularly interested in the preservation of monumental architecture that belongs to the ancient Near East. Her work as a conservationist and her interest in cultural heritage began at a time when cultural heritage was still considered a luxury, irrelevant to the social and economic needs, with devastating results during which both tangible and intangible culture were being forced into decline and decay. She's been especially active in striving to bring about greater awareness and a greater understanding of our cultural diversity and heritage, and to inform local people of their cultural assets. Our next panelist is Barry Through. He is the Director of Software at Obscura Digital and Curator at the Gray Area Foundation for the Arts. He is a designer and technologist focused on spatial media, mutable architectures, and cultural infrastructures. He consults globally with institutions, artists, and organizations at the confluence of art, technology, and culture. Through a variety of venues and mediums, his work explores emerging aesthetics in experiential technology and spatial media arts. He has an academic background in the Masters of Fine Arts from Mills College, and beyond his role at Obscura Digital and the Gray Area Foundation for the Arts, he is also the co-founder of Art Up and has been involved in Recombinant Media Labs, Fabricators, and the Beam Foundation. More recently, he became the director of the New Palmyra Project, which he gave us a little presentation before we began our afternoon sessions, a community-driven effort to preserve and celebrate the endangered cultural heritage of Syria through research, 3D modeling, and active digital creation. And I actually just wanted to read to you guys a quote from the New Palmyra Project website, where he voices his calling for this work, stating, "For millennia, the ancient Syrian city of Palmyra was a vital crossroads of trade and culture. We are hearing the senseless destruction of this archaeological treasure by ISIS as a clarion call for the world to celebrate the cultural heritage of Syria. By sharing our data and encouraging its use in creative explorations, we hope to promote cultural understanding." And I think this really rings true, not only for many people here today, but can help start as an excellent discussion point for many of our discussions today. You did. Well, it's attributed to you on the website. Yes. Our next panelist is Dr. Salam El-Kantar. Salam is a Syrian archaeologist. She is currently a research fellow at the Penn Museum at the University of Pennsylvania. She co-directs the Safeguarding the Heritage of Syria and Iraq project, a project run by the Penn Cultural Heritage Center, the Smithsonian Institute, and the American Association for the Advancement of Science. We've heard a little bit about this morning, as well as the Day After organization. Salam has worked with the Directorate General of Antiquities and Museums in Syria in a number of capacities between 1996 and 2012. Salam has excavated at numerous sites in Syria and is the co-director of the Tel Hamoukar excavation from 2005 into the present. She received her degree in archaeology and museums from Damascus University in 1995, her MA in archaeology from the University of Liverpool in 2004, and her PhD in archaeology from the University of Cambridge in 2009. Her research interests center upon the archaeology and heritage of the Middle East, exploring a wide variety of themes such as ancient economy and urbanism, human mobility and cultural boundaries, forced migration, cultural heritage and identity, and her publications include scholarly articles and chapter contributions on early urbanism in Mesopotamia, on the excavations at Hamoukar, as well as analyses of current struggles in cultural heritage. She is also a National Geographic Emerging Explorer and is involved in the National Geographic Saving the Past initiative. We next have Alison Mickle, who is a PhD candidate in the Department of Anthropology at Stanford University. Her first archaeological fieldwork was located in Kenya and focused on the politics of representation in archaeological writing. Allison is the author of Archaeologists as Authors and the Stories of Sites, Defending the Use of Fiction in Archaeological Writing, a book in which she illustrates how creative writing tropes and strategies could be used effectively by archaeologists seeking to engage a wider variety of interested audiences. Her current research performs an archaeology of Middle Eastern archaeology, using ethnography and oral history to examine the history, experience, and economics of local labor at major archaeological sites in the region, including Petra in Jordan and Çatalhöyük in Turkey. By interviewing the men and women who have worked on archaeological projects for decades at these two sites, her work demonstrates the unique expertise and particular tacit knowledge that generations of skilled site workers acquire from participating in decades of archaeological excavation, as well as the social and political conditions that have devalued that expertise. As the project archaeologist for the Temple of the Winged Lions Cultural Resource Management Project in Petra, Jordan, Allison is also working to evaluate the success of novel contemporary strategies for involving local community members in archaeological initiatives. Our second to last panelist is Dr. Dana Di Pietro. He is the founder and director of SHARE, the Society for Humanitarian Archaeological Research and Exploration. He uses archaeological fieldwork in Middle Eastern conflict zones to engage opposing stakeholder communities in dialogue about the past, the present, and with one another. Dana received his PhD in Near Eastern Art and Archaeology from UC Berkeley in 2012. His research centers on anthropological approaches to trade and cross-cultural contact in antiquity, with an emphasis on the Eastern Mediterranean during the Late Bronze Age. His work also examines the complex relationship between the practice of archaeology, the production of historical narratives, and the politics of the modern Middle East, having excavated at numerous sites in Jordan, Egypt, Yemen, Israel, Palestine over the last decade. In 2010, he founded and now directs the nonprofit SHARE, Society for Humanitarian Archaeological Research and Exploration. SHARE is committed to the idea that the inclusive exploration of the past by stakeholders in ethnic or territorial conflicts can be a powerful tool for promoting dialogue in the present. The organization's archaeological field programs provide neutral settings where participants reconstruct and renegotiate the past, opening new avenues for the future. Now in its fourth year, SHARE's Common Ground initiative in Israel and Palestine promotes dialogue between Israeli, Palestinian, and American students, giving them the chance to engage with the past, present, and one another through a collective exploration of the region's rich heritage. The initiative continues to be successful and was awarded a Projects for Peace Prize by the Catherine Davis Foundation. And last but certainly not least, our last panelist is Cinzia Perlinghieri, who is the executive director of CODA, the Center for Digital Archaeology, located here in the Bay Area. Cinzia started her studies in archaeology in 1989 at the University of Naples in Italy. She obtained her PhD from the same institution in 1999. She's collaborated in many field projects in North Africa and has taught both undergraduate and graduate courses in Italy, Ethiopia, and Bahrain before moving to the United States. In 2008, with a visiting scholarship in the Department of Anthropology at the University of California, Berkeley. Recently, she's been teaching lower and upper division archaeology courses at CSU, Cal State University, East Bay, in 2014 and 15. In 2011, Cinzia co-founded the Center for Digital Archaeology in Berkeley with Michael Ashley, Ruth Tringham, and Meg Conkey. CODA, Center for Digital Archaeology, is now a highly successful California not-for-profit company dedicated to the development of digital services and programs for the study and sustainability of archaeological and cultural content. In addition, she is presently co-director of the Southern Red Sea Archaeological Histories, working with Michael Harrower, with active archaeological survey and excavations at the site of Beta Samanti in the northern Tigray, Ethiopia. She conducts her research activities in parallel with her full-time job at CODA. My hat's off to you for that. So without further ado, I'm actually going to introduce three panelists who are going to very briefly give us a little visual perspective on some of the issues that we're going to talk about this afternoon. So our first panelist who's going to do that is Moorsheen. So please go ahead, Moorsheen.
How long do I have?
A few minutes.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to talk about this project that I've been working on for the last 1 year called Material Speculation, ISIS. So I was doing an artist residency last year at Pier 9 when the video of ISIS destroying the artifacts at Mosul Museum came out. And previously I've done a lot of research and kind of like different art projects thinking about 3D printing in this like critical, poetic ways you can archive, document things, ways you can resist against certain kind of issues, mostly focused on the Middle East. And when this video came out, one of the first things that I started thinking about was how I could respond to this as an artist and an activist, and how I can kind of continue my research in a way of like archiving and documenting, well, in this case, artifacts that have been lost. So I started doing a lot of research around Hatra, Mosul, and I was just entering to this like huge amount of research that I didn't know how complicated it's going to be. But I was really entering as an artist, you know, not really having any specific archaeological, I guess, background, except for studying a lot of history in Iran when I was in school. So once I started doing research and trying to read about Hatra, I learned that there is very little information out there about certain kind of artifacts. When this video came out, there were a lot of articles that were written about, for example, how some of these artifacts were duplicates, and then only some of them were original. I was trying to, like, let's say, just finding information about which one were duplicates and original. And I was trying to contact different people, different archaeologists, friends in Iran, in Iraq, different scholars working here in the US or in Europe. And as I was doing more and more research, there were a lot of information that wouldn't match up. And I was doing my research in Farsi and in Arabic and in English. So I learned that this is going to be a very long research process. And as kind of I continue to talk with different people, I think this was one of the blogs that it was almost a year ago, that was written by this PhD student, Christopher Jones, who's a student at Columbia University. And in this blog, he basically went frame by frame in the video of ISIS destroying the artifacts and described the name of some of the artifacts, where they were from, shared some historical background, etc. So for example, a blog like this had a really important role in my research and understanding some of the things that was happening. But even the names, for example, I mean, not King Uthal or these two, but some of the names wouldn't match up based on like the articles that were written about certain artifact in English. It would be something else in an Arabic text that I found, which is called Al-Hazr or Hatra. So the whole research became very complicated. But at the same time, the production of the artifact was also another layer of complication in this project. So if any of you know about any kind of software that can use still images to create 3D models, for using a software like that, for example, 1-3D Cache or Memento, you need something around 25 to 30 images from different directions, pretty good quality to be able to use that to create a 3D model. And again, one of the big problems with this project was the lack of information. The most images I found from each artifact was something average, from 8 to 10, mostly taken from front or a little bit of a side, not really the back. So that also became another aspect of this project, which made me start this other process of modeling, which was just this thing called box modeling, basically modeling everything from scratch. But because the research was such an important aspect of this project, I decided to include, after 3D printing these artifacts, I have included these, I don't know if you can see it here. Is it? Oh, there, maybe you can see it. So inside each artifact, I've embedded a memory card and a flash drive that contains all the research that I've done, all the PDF files I've gathered, images, my email correspondence with archaeologists, everything, like the whole documentation of this process. And I kind of think about it, again, as these like time capsules, but also ways that I can save this information. I'm just going to say this because one of the questions that I always get about this is that, do I have to destroy this to have access to these memory cards? No. The way that I've done this is that, like if you would look at that, so there's like a kind of like a hole inside the artifacts, and then I've sealed it later using the same material, which is resin, clear resin material. So it won't be easy to access to it, but you don't also have to destroy it. With a sharp object, you could pull out the plug and then have access to it. But this is kind of, at this point, is a more like a metaphoric gesture, really, because I will go through this really quickly, but these are some of the things that are inside this whole list that I later worked with former staff of Mosul Museum to gather the name of everything that was at the museum, etc. This is my studio, me living with all these artifacts in the last 1 year. And I'm just going to go through this really quickly. So I just finished this project, so it's 12 artifacts that I've recreated so far. But one of the things that was really interesting for me is that as an artist, I really started to develop these relationships with these artifacts. You know, it was just beyond this notion of, oh, let's reconstruct these things. You know, I was reading about them. I spent many hours with also like a team of modelers going back and forth modeling these things. I spent hours, you know, after you 3D print them, you go through this process of cleaning and taking it out of this support material, which was like a very kind of archaeologistic, you know, it felt like digging something out of the ground in a way. So for me, this project definitely has these more like personal, emotional, poetic relationships with all these artifacts that I think is a really important part of it. So that, and then I want to kind of talk a little bit really quickly about this notion of giving public access to all these models. Because as I developed this project, there were a lot of other projects that were happening at the same time, trying to reconstruct different artifacts, etc. But I think one of the problems that I immediately started to think about after like 7-8 months of working on this project was this problem with digital colonialism and 3D scanning. I mean, we're experiencing something very special right now with having access to these tools and you know, new technologies, which is, okay, a lot of these like tech companies, different people going to the Middle East or Africa, etc., and saving the cultural heritage. But it's been very important for me to ask where all these files are ending up, who owns them, what's the copyright on them, how we should do this in a way that we're not dealing with this problem of colonialism that I think is really problematic with a lot of different companies doing this stuff. So right now I am at kind of like this stage of figuring out where to host these files. So 2 weeks ago, I released all the information that I have gathered in the last 1 year to public. And then now I'm working on working with a museum that can host the OBJ and STL files. This project in no way is really going to replace what's been lost. And I've said that many times because I don't think that would be an honest way to put it. It's what's lost is lost forever. And I think what I've been trying to do is to recreate it in a most accurate way and then talking about everything else, all the concepts that are around this kind of reconstructions and recreation of things that are lost, in this case, the artifacts at Mosul Museum. I won't talk about this, but maybe in the discussion I will talk about this. But cool, thank you.
Well, I imagine we would love to hear more about this, actually. But if I can ask for your patience for the moment, let's move on and have Dana say a few short words.
Well, I want to begin by thanking the organizers of the event, the panelists for what's been a great session so far. My name is Dana DiPietro, and I'm really happy to be here today speaking on behalf of the Society for Humanitarian Archaeological Research and Exploration, which is a long name for a short acronym, SHARE. And we had an introduction earlier. I'm going to keep my comments very brief, but what we've seen in the first sessions is really, we've been examining how archaeology and heritage is increasingly playing a disturbing role in fueling violence and how its intentional destruction not only serves to erase the past, but also can be used to forward radical ideologies in the present. So we're left with the question then of how we go about addressing this very political nature of archaeology, because we are talking about the past, and the past, as Orwell tells us, always is very political and very important for determining the future. So the question then becomes, how do we address this political nature of archaeology, and is there a way to flip this current narrative to use it to actually, in an opposite way, to promote dialogue, to promote inclusion and social justice, instead of seeing the effects along the lines of division and sectarian strife? And I would say the answer very much is yes, that is possible, precisely because of the political nature of archaeology. That political nature gives us the opportunity to engage with these substantive issues and engage with the politics of the present. And what's more, archaeology is kind of perfectly suited to this too. Many of you have probably been in archaeological digs. You know what a physical environment it is. You know how it can actually create bonds, strong bonds and camaraderie in the field, even if what you're bonding over is how much you hate the food and you're waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning. So we took these ideas and we combined them in a project that we called the Common Ground Initiative, which launched in 2012. I just have a couple images here, which we can sort of cycle through.
Thank you.
The idea behind the Common Ground Initiative was to create a fellowship program for young Israeli and Palestinians to come together on archaeological digs and give them the opportunity to engage with the past, but also give them the chance to engage with the present and with one another. Let me jump through here. Over the past 4 years, we've partnered with a number of excavations in Israel and organizations in Palestine as well. The Leon Levy expedition at Ashkelon, Jaffa's Cultural Heritage Project at Jaffa, Penn State's Total Archaeology Project in Akko, as well as Berzeit University and Hebrew University as well. So we want to thank those partners very much. And each program is very, very different with a different emphasis and focus. Our programs range from going to actual sites, talking to local stakeholders and examining the same site from different perspectives. The City of David is a great example. We also work with West Bank Palestinians in the case of our Ashkelon program, and Israelis from Jerusalem, and then also take a local community approach at our sites at Jaffa and at Akko, where we engage with the Arab Israeli community and the Jewish Israeli community. In the case of Akko, whom are actually physically divided by the Ottoman fortifications of the city and have very little interaction. So we've worked there for the last 3 years in conjunction with the International Conservation Center in Akko and Penn State Total Archaeology Project to provide these opportunities for these young people to come together and actually excavate and learn conservation techniques. So we essentially have 2-week programs where they come, they learn excavation, conservation, and at the same time, we give them the opportunity to really make the program their own. There's no hand-holding, there's no, there are ground rules, right? We do have respect, and we promote true dialogue. We emphasize the difference between understanding and agreeing in that context, right? Because there are two very different things. The aim of the project is to give them the chance to reach a level of understanding, if not agreement. And over the last 4 years, we've had a tremendous amount of success, giving them the chance to take ownership of the program. They've actually led a series of tours, friendships that have continued, and right now we're working on a project in Akko, which is going to be essentially a youth heritage, bicommunal youth heritage center that the students are actively engaged in conserving together. So the work that they are doing is going directly towards taking ownership of that project, which I think fundamentally, and we can talk about this in the panel and in the conversation to follow, is an essential component to seeing these projects actually succeed. You can't come at this from a top-down approach. You actually have to work with the local communities and ask them, is this something that would work for you? The idea of this Heritage Center was not ours, it was our students, and as a result, it's moving forward and we're seeing a lot of success. So thank you, and I'll pass the baton, so to speak.
Thank you. And following right along with that theme of working with local communities, our last person who's going to show us some visuals here is Chinzia.
There's the person. Oh. Thank you. Sorry. No, you're good. It was on the screen somewhere. So, no, I'll be here, and it's, I just need a few minutes. So I would like to contribute to this panel with a positive story. We have seen a lot of destruction. I would like to talk and give an opening to the following discussion, putting the emphasis more on the beyond the destruction. So this is the title of the panel, and talk about a positive story of interfaith coexistence in a place. I know about a place where Christians and Muslims build together and do not destroy. Is the small village of Indagaruba in the remote region of Yeha in northern Ethiopia. Here is situated the archaeological site of Beta Senari that has been mentioned, where Mike Arrow and I are conducting excavations within the Sursa project. The archaeological history of this place goes back to the first millennium BC and seems to have left a big footprint on the communities that live here. In Indagaruba, in fact, the Muslims work side by side with Christians. Christians celebrate Muslim festivals and vice versa. And in social occasions, Muslim and Christians take their place side by side, locking hands and dancing. Oh, thank you. And dancing traditional dances. Social elements attached to ancient traditions seem to have a predominance on diversity of belief. The origins of such a positive coexistence in this community are in fact very ancient. The advent of Islam in the 7th century profoundly transformed the character and culture of many regions in the Old World, from northern India to Spain. Ethiopia, as one of the regions geographically impacted by the Muslim wave, makes a very special case in this story. Northern Ethiopia was never conquered to Islam. Its kings and population firmly kept their ancient Christian faith while establishing amicable relations with the Muslims, and well more than amicable, as from different historical sources we know that the kings of Ethiopia in 600, in more than one occasion in the first half of 600 AD, granted refuge to early Muslims escaping the Quraysh persecution back home. Northern Ethiopia remained steadily Christian ever since, but these amicable relationships never changed to these very days, as demonstrated by the communities living in Indagaruba. My take on this is that cultural heritage holds, or has the potential to hold, a key to peaceful cohabitation more than religious beliefs or political convictions do. Communities that have preserved a harmonious interfaith coexistence they inherited from the past naturally share a strong sense of social heritage, a blend of history, cultural identities, monuments, oral traditions, folklore, celebrations that all become part of the very existence of a society. As modern archaeologists, we need to become part of the social heritage of the communities we work with. At CODA, the nonprofit that I run, and within the Sursa project that I run with Mike Harrower, we have come to enjoy the idea that by working at a unique conjunction between anthropology, archaeology, and digital technology, we can help foster communities' social heritage and promote a growing sense of belonging to a common ancient tradition. By establishing a collaborative environment and by creating long-lasting trust and learning experiences, we hope that our projects will, in fact, make a difference. At CODA particularly, our efforts of the last years have been concentrated into building digital tools that facilitate involvement and learning in archaeology, together with being concerned about the digital preservation of data. There is a lot of complexity about digital preservation of cultural data and of any type of content. We have built tools with this in mind. We are building tools with this in mind, tools that are easy to use, actually the easiest that I know of for archaeology. And within the CIRSA project, we have adopted quite a lot of CODA's tools. Our Codify CIRSA database that is, has a super easy interface, very easily adopted in a matter of really minutes, maybe not even an hour, during our work, during our field season in CIRSA. Both local and students from abroad have learned it, easily adopted, and ran with it. And also a sharing platform for cultural data. And I am happy to show this, this work as it is newborn. And I would like to point out a few features of our website. Is not appropriate, is a really cultural data platform that features a private archival repository for raw research data for the people, for the team members, for people to work together in the background while research is ongoing. A public content in English maintained by the project community in collaboration with local participants. And we have created an Amharic and Tigrinya communities on the platform that are open to Ethiopian researchers, students, and local historians for continued access and contribution. And I just want to say that these people that we have the fortune to work with are open for this change. They are ready for this change. They have internet, it may be spotty sometimes, but it's there. Mobile phones are commonly used. They are ready, they are more ready than we think. So we don't come into this place as the holders of the technology. Technology has nothing super mysterious for these people as far as I can tell. And we're all ready to work together. So this is our beautiful website. I'm super happy. It works on the mobile if you want to check it out. I forgot to add the link, but I will give it to you if you want to check it out. So Amharic and Tigrinya. Is it working? I got a bit, not moving forward. I have a cute video that you need to see. All right, yeah, I was working. And I want to close with this very improvised video that we shot during the excavation. It was a working day. The workers agreed to work with us that day, even though it was a big celebration for Ethiopia, the day of that the local people won against the Derg, the communist regime that has been dominating in Ethiopia until the early 90s. And the workers, we were under pressure, we were closing, they were happy to work, and we had this coffee together, and I shot this little video. Oh, yeah, we needed the...
One of the member from this archaeologist project, and this is based on the May 28th celebration. Just the Muslim and the Christian, we celebrate together, and the Muslim just help for the Christianity when they do church, and when the Christian, when they need to build the church, help the Muslim. So both hand in hand, they live for a long of years from the ancient time still today. As you see here also, this is a good celebration and a good festivity of May 28th, and we are happy all together. حيجي سحقوا لحدا زين.
Thank you.
So in preparation for today's session, and very much within the theme of moving beyond destruction from the perspective of practice, I've asked the panelists to think about a number of issues that I hope will then be discussed amongst you guys and amongst the panelists. And some of these include themes that we've heard of already from some of our panelists. So notably thinking about how cultural heritage may or may not differ between archaeological communities, other communities, and local communities. Thinking about who are the stakeholders and what is at stake, something that I think follows along very nicely from the last points made in our morning session. And so with that in mind, I would actually just like to open up the floor directly to audience questions. You can either stand up and speak loudly, or if you're not sure your voice will project far enough, then please come down and use the microphone here. So have we got any comments from the audience? Any questions?
Everybody need to stretch or something? Long day.
Yeah.
Yes, my name is Scott Page. I'm an architect and I do laser scanning. So I was curious about your comment about preservation issues with digital information. I'm interested in heritage projects. I've done several with SciArc and some other people, but I do a lot of factories and other things, very practical, bread and butter type of architectural things. I think the main advantage of a tool like laser scanning is to get it before it gets blown up, frankly. If you're doing heritage projects or damage from other things, where it goes is an issue. And I think that's an issue with digital content in general. It's not just specific to scanning data. Well, where does it go? It's not as durable, frankly, as vellum or books, things like that. So there's some technical issues that need to be overcome, but I think the ability to quickly get an area scanned is very valuable, because once it's damaged, it is an adjunct to photography and other historic materials, but it's just part of it. It's not going to replace it, obviously. So that's my 2 cents.
Well, perhaps I can ask both Morshin, who deals with portable artifacts, and Sarur, who is an architect and conservator, who perhaps deals with the more stationary artifacts and objects, to comment on that first.
Yeah, I don't think it's the same as thinking about, every other digital file goes somewhere, and it's not the same. I mean, you cannot take out context, you cannot take out history, you cannot take out the whole, Western history of colonialization and these things. This has a context, and we have to talk about that context, right? So it is not like any other digital files. We have to talk about where these files go. We have to talk about what museum preserved these files. I have made it very hard for myself to make these decisions in the process of making this work. I'm obviously, this is being from Iran. This is a big portion of the history that Iranian culture also belongs to. But still, I am not comfortable in having these digital files hosted by British Museum. I think if anything, I want to find a museum, let's say in the Middle East, that even if they don't have, if they're underfunded or don't have access to this technology, to work with another museum. But it's important for me to think about context, and it's important for me to think about these histories. And as an artist, this ethical aspect of this project has been a big portion of my work, and I've been going back and forth a lot, thinking about things, questioning myself, questioning how this project is influencing or not influencing something that I don't want to be a part of. So yeah, I do think it's our responsibility to think about these things.
The story from my side is very different. I've been working in Iran since 1995. and I have been trying to scan the buildings which are situated in this island, in this island in the middle of Hamun Lake. And I have obtained any permission from any authorities in Iran, outside of Iran, with UNESCO, with university here. Then OFAC, Office of Foreign Asset Control, came into picture, which of course we couldn't work during that time. The problem is that you can do the preparation and scan the building and create documents and working documents and all of that, and of course you can preserve it in museums, local museums and outside museums, and also on the web, which is accessible to everybody. But the problem is that in my case, I work in southeast Iran, bordering with Pakistan and Afghanistan. The problem is that you get all the permission, you take your crew, you go there, but you end up not doing the project for various reasons. And even when you do shoot the building or scan the buildings for 3D reconstruction, it takes forever to get the data from the people who were doing this special ways of recording the buildings. But that's one problem. The main problem is that the whole region is a mess. I mean, from India all the way to Africa, it really is a mess. What takes place in Afghanistan, which by the way they have destroyed mostly everything, comes down to the area that I work. And then you have the US forces who are stationing on the Afghan sides near Sistan. You have the farmers in Afghanistan, and then you have the people who work with cultural heritage. Everybody has their own tune, and just making everything work together, it has been more or less impossible, at least for me in that area. But to put emphasis on that area, both Afghanistan and Sistan, is that they are extremely important, these regions, for the global heritage, our common heritage, which is disappearing faster than we could record them. So everybody has their own thoughts, and when we do something, you have to see 100 different people from different establishments to get permission, which I have done. I go legally, I get all of this. But in reality, when it comes to do the real project, we haven't been able to go much further, because supposedly my team has, not my team, the team I'm with, has people from all countries, European countries here, and we get ready to go to scan. For example, somebody here who has just been married, has a little kid, they get scared to go to Iran. And things like that. But what I like to say is that Iran does have a central government who does look for their heritage. The destruction comes through architectural development, through other venues that they're connected to the government, whether they get the real permit to do the work or not. And with any change in the government of Iran, the work stops. So we have a lot of documents, but it hasn't been published or put on internet, and a lot of people are scared to do that because they think it's going to eventually disappear. And aside from that, my site has, I mean, my area, my region has gone totally to nothing. It used to be a lush, green, fantastic area. You had desert, you had water, similar to Egypt, parts of Egypt, with a lot of historical and archaeological ruins. In the last 5-6 years, the damage that has been done to the area is beyond comprehension for me anyway. The local people do their own things. The other people on the other side do their own thing. So ecologically and economically, it has been devastated, the area. On Iranian side, they have had natural drought for 5 years. So that was the beginning of the disaster. So the water didn't come in. Then it had, Sistan has several important natural events every year, or had. Like every October, all the migratory doves would come next to the lake, close to the site I work, and also cranes. They kept coming to the lake seasonally. But drought destroyed a lot of things. The Iranian government, how they came up with this idea, I don't know. They decided to establish a cement factory in the city of Zabul, where it was everything green and they were animal herder or wheat cultivator, because it was the breadbasket of Iran up to middle of the 20th century. So all of those has disappeared. When you go there, you only see gypsum and calcine coming up from the lake. They have camels running in the bed lake, grazing. So it's destroying everything fundamentally. But the worst thing is that because of lack of job in that area, because it was destroyed, the cement factory was established, so they created cement. People went to the borders and they sold those cement to the Afghani people without any regulation or rules or anything. So as a result, we have multiple illicit dams on Hirmand River. So the water doesn't get to Hamun, which is a UNESCO World Heritage. And as a result, now you have a deserted, useless piece of land there. So all of our data and documentation, I don't know what you could do with it. But the problem is not, in this case, the government of Iran. I mean, there has been mishaps and weird things happening, but they do have a guard on every archaeological site, and they're sitting there really watching everything. And people do not have arms or guns or things like that to attack and loot. Although looting takes place, every day, for example, in Shahr Sukhte, because everything is on surface. But the site that I work, Koh Haje, was a Zoroastrian temple complex, has given us the largest pre-Islamic collection of paintings Greco-Roman Iranian paintings from 2nd century all the way to 9th century. So the wealth of archaeological finds are there. We found 2 paintings, but we had to cover it in order not to be destroyed later. Then in that area you have other problems, like the winds of 120 days, which has become the winds of 200 days now. And it's a sandstorm, blows continuously from May to August, and in 4 days you have about 3 meters of sand collecting next to every building or all of that. So people are moving out of the area, and I don't know what else to say. It's so depressing.
I think Sur brings up an excellent point that probably many people can speak to, which is that cultural heritage preservation is a little bit more than thinking about sites just in conflict zones. There are a lot of other issues wrapped around the preservation of these sites. So maybe thinking a little bit broadly also about the role of technology in this, I wanted to maybe open this up to any of the...
add one more
Can I just ask, and then maybe we can go forth? To open this up to any of our other panelists, how they may envision technology in their own ways that they use different types of technology, and the media, what role they may have in either aiding or hindering cultural heritage preservation.
Yeah, I'd like to briefly address, particularly this question of the proper stewardship of this data, particularly with respect to neocolonialism. And since you brought up SciArc as an example, which are doing fantastic work, so I'm going to leverage some light criticism their way. But the thing is, what are they doing with their data? And they're throwing it in a server under a rock somewhere, and it's sitting there, which is both sort of disappointing in terms of missed opportunity of people that could, would be interested in engaging with it in some way or another. And sort of, lightly troubling in the sense that, when you go in and scan somebody's, a people's, cultural heritage, whether it's architecture or an artifact or whatever, there is value that you gain from it, and that value is only going to appreciate, as us living in a, being chained to a, universe that's gonna, has entropy. The physical thing's only going to deteriorate, and the digital thing's only going to become more valuable as time goes on. And so, what do you do about that? I'm sort of responsibly dealing with that data. After thinking about, our approach to it is for both a couple of practical reasons, which is that if digital media, the best way to preserve it is to distribute it as widely as possible. That's the reason these things are endangered, is because there's only one of them, and it blow it up and it's gone. And so if you distribute this stuff, then any place that that's easy, and the best way to do that is just online, just give it away. And also with respect to I don't think this is a full answer to the problem, but in terms of what does it mean for me, somebody that's clearly not Syrian, to go and do a project where we're remodeling stuff and making this thing that has value based on this cultural heritage. The best thing to do is have everything completely publicly available as much as we can. So I poke SciArc a little bit about this every once in a while, but download now. Just get the thing. That's a big step to saying like, yeah, we have this thing, but we're not holding on to any particular intellectual property of it in terms of gaining value out of going and collecting this stuff, which as we get more technologies to be able to experience these sorts of digital files in different ways, then the questions come up like, oh, if you have a 3D model of the pyramids that's available for everyone with an Oculus headset, is that going to hurt the tourism industry in Egypt for people going there? Is it going to help it? I'm not sure. It could be either, actually. You know, maybe it encourages people to go there. Maybe people are like, I don't have flat, you know, once you get to a certain level of immersion. So there'll be more questions like that arise.
Anyone else like to? Yeah, Cindy.
I would like to add something to what Barry, I believe, just said. I completely agree. I mean, as I mentioned, there is. Thank you. Sorry. There is a lot of effort that has been put into preserving digital data. All mediums, all types of mediums that carry information have their pros and cons. Paper or cuneiform tablets on earthenware are virtually indestructible, but they can be destroyed, they can go in pieces, they can burn. Digital supports, digital media have their issues as well. And Barry was saying something really true. At the moment, nobody has, there is a lot of effort, but nobody has a magic recipe for saving digital data in perpetuity. It is true, opening data, spreading information so that people can adopt it and reuse it and understand it and update it in a way that can be reused and in this way diffused and preserved for the future. As fascinating as the idea of creating a time capsules with little things inside that can be preserved for the future is, we still don't have the possibility to do that, because in a very short period of time, digital data change, format change, softwares stop being supported. So there is all this complexity. So, hardware changes. So at the moment, the trend, after thinking we need to protect the data, we need to put them in this lock data information into archives and preserve them forever. And then at some point it's totally unreadable. Nobody can make sense of it. So at the moment, yes, the best chance that we have, the best shot that we have is share data, put data out there, of course, with the concern of long-term preservation. Make sure that whatever medium you use, you can pull out data and reuse it into some other way, store it in one place and in a different place. And this is the best shot that we have so far.
Thanks. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I'd just like to say a few things. I've been really enjoying, you know, the program and listening to a lot of people speak, and it's a really topic we're all passionate about. You know, I think from my perspective, you know, some of my research is funded by NASA, so I could talk about the small technical details of satellite imagery and things like that. But what really gets me fascinated is thinking about the forest rather than the individual trees, you know, in the bigger picture here in terms of what all gets us interested in cultural heritage. You know, and it's not only the artifacts and the monuments, but the human values. You know, human rights was brought up this morning quite a number of times. The ingenuity, creativity, the diversity in terms of human culture and expression. And I think, you know, in the past few decades, we're really in a time of a lot of conflict around the world, and certainly conflict in the Middle East, and even more anxiety about what happens in the future. And I think if we're all, you know, if there's one thing I feel like that we all add, it's, you know, ability to kind of break down some of the factionalization that happens, you know. So I've really been interested, I worked quite a long time in Yemen, in, you know, comparisons of different cultures, different cultural contexts, different places. You know, I think in so many contexts we have a sort of an us-them, east-west, you know, factionalization and hostility and conflict. And cultural heritage is perhaps one of the best avenues to kind of break that down. You think about mutual understanding and diplomacy around the world, a shared understanding of culture and history is really what we build partnerships on. And it's just so interesting to see people coming at that from a different angle, from an art artistic angle, from an art historical angle, from an archaeological angle. So I've been, just really pleased to be involved in the program and thinking about ways that we can kind of leverage cultural heritage to build a more peaceful, amicable future.
You brought up something there that was kind of interesting just a quick point about our approach to it. I mean, one of the things that we brought up originally was this idea of stakeholders and, who is even, and more than who we consider as stakeholders, I think what's important is who considers themselves a stakeholder in these issues. And so one of the things we're trying to do with some success, I think, in terms of both having data available and being somewhat flexible in the types of contributions that we consider to be, appropriate ways to engage with something like archaeology, that we're, encouraging, that when, if you read about something or if you just learn it in school, you read it in a book or something like that, watch a movie, you have a certain sort of passive engagement with it. But if you make something and are like actively being creative with data and trying to like produce things and getting people involved on that level, then you have a much deeper connection in terms of like personal engagement with some of these issues. So in terms of what we're doing, curation and these workshops and things like that, it's really about increasing the number of stakeholders globally all over the world. And then you have some sort of understanding that, maybe the stuff you're engaging with isn't your tradition of cultural heritage, but the shared cultural heritage in the world is something that's, crucial to maintain, with effort.
So maybe we can take an audience question.
Yeah, I work at the library here on campus, and I just wanted to pick up on what the two of you were talking about, archiving and sharing and storing data. I'm a user experience designer there. I'm not a librarian, but I've been involved with digital heritage for 15 years with this gentleman. And I've been nudging at our director of digital services that we need to prepare, libraries need to prepare for this onslaught of 3D data that will be coming, because the California Digital Library, the Online Archive of California, they're working madly to digitize things, flat things, right, like texts and photographs. And I'm out there issuing this canary call that the archaeologists have different needs, and everybody is telling me, that's a really great idea, we don't have the bandwidth. And so I would really like to see the cultural heritage community come rally behind me and address the library. And this is a very good time to do it, because with the latest round of budget cuts coming at Berkeley, they are trying to prioritize and figure out where it is they should be putting their money, where it is they should be putting their efforts. And all the things that you're describing, crowdsourcing is great, but it tends to fizzle out. There's nobody tending the fire endlessly. These ideas of keeping new generations of technologies, how do you archive when you're going from generation to generation? This is not a new problem. We had VHS tapes after Betamax, and after VHS we had DVD, and now we have the Blu-ray, and that's an archivist's job. And the archaeologists, beyond agreeing to metadata standards, I don't think the archaeologists should really have to worry about it, because it's not where they should be spending their energy. I think the archivists should worry about it, but I think that we need to somehow get a conversation going with the archaeologists and the cultural heritage people, get a conversation going with the libraries and with the archivists. And I met several years ago at a conference in Hong Kong, one of the directors of CultNat at the Library of Alexandria, and obviously that library has a intimate history with the results of radical fundamentalist ideologies and how that affects cultural heritage. They've been burned down a few times. So the Library of Alexandria has really taken a lead in doing this digitization and as a library archiving. So I'm wondering if there's some way that we can pull together these communities to like rally into the library and say, you know, we need your services and we need you to start laying the groundwork for those services, because the amount of 3D data, whether it's an object or a whole site, which is obviously a lot of polys, right? We need the libraries to start preparing, because first there was a papyrus and then there was a book and now there's this, and what are you going to do with it and how are you going to make it accessible to people? And the other issue that we're working on with libraries is all these data sets are very siloed. And so if you're a researcher, you don't necessarily know where the data is. So the big issue in cultural heritage from a library science standard is how do you connect all these databases? So I'm wondering how the archaeology community is thinking about that too. But my primary question is like, can we just like on can you provide this to, but as you're thinking about the library of the 21st century, can you please take into consideration what we need to have stored and what we need to have access to, what we need to allow others to have access to?
Thanks. Well, I'm not sure if we can solve that this afternoon, but perhaps
please.
please.
Of that. You hit an incredibly important point. We have, for instance, a collaboration with the NPS, National Park Service, to address, it's a small project, to address the problems of massive digital data. That's right. We've been thinking of digital data as scans of bidimensional things. In archaeology, in architecture, if we want to really preserve digital data in its complexity, 3D models, etc., that's a lot of data. Mauricine was mentioning even to document three-dimensionally a small object is like hundreds sometimes of photos that go with it, and together to document it, and together with amounts of data that explains the process, that explains the context, and all that you can imagine that can go in terms of information, different digital pieces that go together with that object. So we're working towards that, and at the NPS at some point they say, we are receiving Library of Congress. The problem is huge. They say, we're receiving all of a sudden these huge amounts of images, data, bytes, and we don't have that capacity. And this is a very interesting angle, and I hope, I invite Michael Ashley from CODA too to chime in, because there is this idea of digital storage is cheap, is ridiculously cheap. There are possibilities to store data digitally that are really very affordable. And there is still a political and institutional idea of the institutional repository that for some magic has some particular capacity of preserving data in perpetuity. And they do exactly what you're describing. They are trying to lock in formats. They are trying to, this is really not, let's not preserve, let's not think about 3D data right now. Let's focus on the bidimensional, like words will stop behind the institutional library to, let's take care of the two-dimensional stuff. Let's leave out all this other stuff. It's not how it should work. I am really not an expert of institutional libraries. What is the political will or the strength behind in a community like ours to talk to those particular stakeholders and find a different way, because we still pay a lot of money. Like, you have up to 10 megabytes of space to keep your stuff. Yeah. So it's a bit of a problem because we work with massive data now. So I don't know what power would a community like this have with institutions, but there is definitely a lot of conversation going on right now. I don't know if Michael wants to add something to this. Maybe later. But yeah, this is definitely a big, I'm in for any discussion, for any demonstration. Yeah, totally, for any marching. I'm in. Save the data.
Would any of our other panelists
Get
like
cheap
to?
storage, it's possible. You don't have a magic wand.
Would anyone else like to add to that?
So I've been involved at ch.Who for the past 3 years on creating a living archive of our data. The project's been ongoing since 1993, and we used a very, very obsolete Microsoft Access database to save all of our information. And it was stored in all these sort of overlapping and inconsistent tables that didn't pull information correctly. So we spent 2 years trying to work with some librarians from Stanford to create a living archive. The first problem we encountered was funding. There's only enough funding to create a pilot. We couldn't actually implement the movement of the entire data into whatever system we created. And then the second problem was that I guess I'm kind of challenged what you said, that it's the archivist's job and not the archaeologist's job, because the first year of this 2-year project was spent trying to work with the librarians to explain the data structure, but not from a computer science standpoint, like what a unit is versus a feature versus a space versus a building, and how those are concentric, and then what's a find and we have X finds, like we have all these specialized terminologies that maybe are specific to ch.Who, but also require a lot of archaeological knowledge to master. So I don't know that, like, saying, if we had just come in and said, like, we need this from you, it would have been a very effective conversation. It took a year of saying, listen, like, this is how archaeology works, and this is how it looks in data form, this is how it's shaped. And so I think it has to be like a little bit of a joint project to be successful. So once you march, you have to, I think, like, join hands together. I don't know, something else.
Here on campus, we have the Visual Resource Center. They're a little bit of a go-between because they serve the art history department. So in terms of things like letting libraries know what metadata fields you need, they're a little bit of a bridge, but I think that's a really good, that might be a good starting point, is how do we term the data?
I think
Actually, Dana wanted to make a comment first. So please go
I just wanted to add that well, first of all, I think it's tremendously ironic that as historians and archaeologists, we're still faced with the same problems that we've seen since antiquity, right? Of actually copying data over and over again for to keep it in perpetuity. I did just briefly want to address the other side of the coin, though, when we're talking about the role of technology in terms of giving access, and just to pick up on a couple of points that were made earlier, the sort of democratization of technology. When we start having access to new ways, we've talked a lot about 3D photogrammetry, right, which is a sea change in terms of individual access to record and protect cultural heritage. We mentioned laser scanning earlier, LiDAR, for example. Now we don't need those systems which are bulky, expensive, to actually record cultural heritage. Anyone with a computer and a camera can essentially start doing this and using it. As you've demonstrated too, you were mentioning in your work, in our work as well, our students are starting to be trained in 3D photogrammetry, and we have a student who's doing a project on a cemetery and wants to preserve it. So I do think there's a tremendous opportunity there on the other side of the coin as well. And but I don't have an answer for the long term.
Mike, did you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, actually Patty brought up something this morning that I thought was really interesting. Obviously, digital technologies are really transforming the world around us, but as she sort of mentioned, it's not a substitute for protection and preservation of these places, right? So it doesn't completely work as a stand-in. I know it's so distressing to see not only the human cost and the lives lost in places like Syria, but also the fact that of all these Egyptian archaeological sites that we know are just really of world-class kind of importance, we know where they are. We know, in some extent, the people who are, why they're being damaged, and we're still incapable of sort of preventing that. So I suppose, education and building a shared concern for these things, not only amongst the audience in the United States, but around the world, is really key. Even it's striking that even these days key military leaders recognize that more weapons, more bombs, more bullets aren't going to overcome the conflict. That really we're facing a war of ideas, and our work as scholars in art and humanities and social sciences and sciences You know, and as one panelist mentioned, stakeholders in this issue really can play a key role, I think, in trying to you know, make a change in that war of ideas. So I think it's really critical that we, you know, speak out as loudly as we can to try to confront some of the really dogmatic voices that propel this kind of conflict.
I just want to add to what Mike said. Is we've heard a lot about today about technology and what you can do technology about. I wouldn't call it preserving heritage. This is documenting. And a year ago, I met with some colleagues from Libya, coming from the Directorate of Antiquities, and they said, so all the, you know, Americans, Europeans we talk to, they talk about, oh, let's document this, digitize, you know, laser scanning, satellite imagery. So are we like, in Arabic we say like the bad witnesses, where we let this happen and we write it in a book, or we put it on a website, or, you know, we recreate it and put it in Trafalgar Square in London? Is this the ethical question about preserving heritage? Right now it's either destroyed, as we saw from the Egyptian case, by, you know, development, lack of security and law enforcement, or, you know, intentional destruction, or you know, bombing. So we have a huge crisis, and part of the crisis is to do with the field of Middle Eastern archaeology, or Near Eastern archaeology to speak. It was so removed from the question of heritage. A lot of people who work in the Middle East, archaeologists, have little connection with the current, you know, places where they work. They don't speak the languages of the country. They don't even understand the social system or the political system. So we have a problem. You know, you imagine in Egypt, how many Egyptologists are working in Egypt, and they apply for funding to study like stratigraphy or pottery, right? They wouldn't apply for funding to preserve a site. It's not in their interest. This is a field that very much, you know, founded on colonialist and Orientalist views, and this is what we faced with the crisis, with the destruction by war. It's exposed the problems, the ethical problems of the field. You know, this is it's not. I mean, it's actually the crisis created more opportunities for Western scholars to work on the crisis, right? But it did not create any opportunity to preserve the heritage. This is, I mean, these are questions I'd like to, you know, bring up.
Well, perhaps we can take the opportunity. I've been asked by the organizers to make sure that there's a break in this afternoon's session, because the morning was, I think, a little bit lengthy. So in order to give the panelists a chance to drink some water, I'll take a 5-minute break now. So 5 minutes, and then we're actually going to start again with a couple of audience questions. So, thanks. I'm going to call on another audience member to ask our next question. So if you want to go ahead, Ben.
One thing I'm really admiring about the diversity of the panel is how you're all engaged in something that's rather disruptive. It's disruptive to two different kinds of communities. One, the sort of ivory tower academic community, but also the sort of being disruptive to our folk narratives that everyday people have about the past, the Middle Eastern past, about perhaps their own pasts. So in one way I think it's being disruptive to both of those rather polarizing communities is that I don't hear much concern with authenticity in what you're discussing. And if I think back 10, 15 years ago about this kind of conversation on the destruction of cultural heritage, which I was engaged in those conversations, it was always about the authentic versus the meta, or we're going to lose the original piece. I remember with the destruction of the Baghdad Museum, it was we're going to now just have a virtual canon or a virtual collection, so you can't recover those pieces. They're broken or they've been stolen. So I'd like to hear different people talk about what you think is disruptive about what you're doing to those two different kind of communities, and to what extent now in 2016 does authenticity really matter? Maybe it doesn't. Maybe that's a good thing.
My turn. Please. It doesn't matter in my case because it's painting, reliefs, and architecture. They cannot manipulate the authenticity in that side. but they are very aware in Iran, to my amazement, that they know that fake and copies are flooding the market, whether it's from Iran or Afghanistan, because it's basically very close artifacts. So they know that, and they have on and on, they have arrested people when they were about to smuggle the copies out, or who knows, or the original pieces out. They have arrested a lot of those people. But the problem is the bureaucracy of two organizations. Is the bureaucracy of Iran. For example, if you want to fix something in Sistan, the governor office has to okay this. The Ministry of Culture and Guidance and Heritage, they have to okay that. Then the Office of Roads and Buildings and all of the, so you have like 10 different organizations there that they have to come together in order to make one decision, which never takes place. The other
Sounds like University of California.
exactly. No, not exactly. No, it's worse.
Yeah, it's definitely worse. Yeah.
And the other problem is UNESCO itself. And nobody this morning talked about that. I mean, they said they're ineffective. We know that because we haven't seen anything anywhere happening. You know, we keep hearing their name, and I work with them.
I mean, they're famous for that, right?
Yes.
It's like they don't really get things done. It's all about funding and money.
They don't, and they have a lot of money. For example, I was in charge of assessment report for BAM, before the earthquake and after the earthquake. I was going back and forth trying to get my bearings, and I couldn't, because apparently UNESCO had done some earlier work, which I never got to see it, and they are also, the office in Tehran is also responsible for Afghanistan and Tajikistan, the Persian-speaking countries there. And I haven't seen much being done. You know, we do a lot of paperwork, and we do send it to this, to that, to be approved, and we do all of those, but the result is not tangible. We don't see anything being done. Aside from archaeological assets, Baluchistan and Sistan, they have tremendous amount of cultural effects. Textile, rugs, music instrument, making musical instruments, and a lot of other things. But I have never seen a poster in UNESCO even saying this. I mean, they do other good stuff visually, you know, poster-wise, not on the side. The word heritage, I don't know what they're doing in Iran. I know they're there, but I haven't been able to figure out what they're doing. And worst of all is the hydraulic department. Because whatever is happening to Sistan is because of water. And I'm sure they could have regulated it between them, between Afghanistan and Iran. And this problem has been going on since the early 20th century. And still is a problem. People don't have water to even drink. But once they created these natural dams, which the idea came before the revolution by some Japanese experts, they did build these natural dams, but it doesn't have an outlet. They forgot to put an outlet. So another huge project popped in to add piping, this type of things to be able to get the water out of the dams, which they have done. As a result, southern part of Baluchistan, now it's green and magnificent and wonderful, but the main area who produce, like here and Los Angeles. You know, we have all the water here, but we don't have any water here because of Los Angeles and all the other, you know, areas on the way. So even if we do all of this digitizing, which I think it's great, but at the moment is not helping anything. We are losing arts, crafts, all of this at the same time, because we can do only so much. You know, we can record architecture, we can record destruction, but nobody goes after those other artifacts and music, for example, intangible properties. They don't go after that. And I have a lot of respect for UNESCO at the same time, because they're trying to handle everything. But in reality, I haven't seen much done. The same thing in the pyramids of Chogazambil in Southwest. I went there also for assessment, and I really didn't see anything happening except beautiful light show at night that you can see, you know, on the pyramids. And everybody thought I'm somebody important, so they came to me and they gave me a detailed list of their costs of this and that. And I knew the original budget, which was gave to this project by Japanese, and UNESCO was managing it, and I was working on the file. But when I got to the site, off of $500,000, apparently only $100,000 in a span of 5, 6, 7 years was spent on Chogazambil, sorry. Chogazambil. And I don't know what they did. I really don't know, and I couldn't make up a report. So you have that situation with UNESCO all over. It's not Iran, in Syria. Somebody in the morning said why we didn't take care of, you know, as archaeologists and artists and art historian, everybody knew they were going to blow up the Buddhas in Bamiyan. Everybody in our field, everybody knew. Nobody said anything. For a few years, nobody said here anything. As soon as they blew it up, everybody jumped in, this and that. So I don't know where is the problem. I just know there is a problem.
Do any of our other panelists want to?
Can I talk about that? Because I think that's something that I've thought about a lot when I was working on the project, like this kind of like aura of the artifacts, right? As Walter Benjamin talks about it. So what does it mean? Like, how does that change the whole relationship that you have with this object? As I said, like, I don't think there's any way to really replace these things, right? They're not going to feel the same. They're not going to smell the same. It's not even in the same size, which I'm actually very okay with, because I don't think like the life-size thing in Times Square is going to add anything to our conversation. But the way I have tried to think about it is that kind of thinking about this as this collective act, right? So the more people save it on their computers, the more people 3D print this, even if it's in like a really like bad plastic, I don't know, like material that might probably come out with some errors or whatever. But it's about creating that reference. That has been really important for me. Like and when I was talking about my project, I was talking about the lack of information. And I think now if you would search King Uthal on Google Image, so many of the things that come up are from the project that I've done. And before that, it was like very little amount of information that would come, right? And then since this whole like destruction has happened, there has been so many more articles written in Arabic, in Farsi, in English about these artifacts specifically, because scholarly there's also just lack of information from Hatra as an era. But I think that's the way I see it, that you are, yes, it's not going to have that aura, or there's not really like, it's not going to be the original thing. But then the other side of it is that you're just creating a reference for the future. And hopefully that will be with saying that and committing to the fact that it's just a replacement of the original.
I got a couple of things on this. I mean, I think the first thing, so going to diffuse a couple of things here in terms of my stance on technology, and then probably throw some gas on the fire just because, you know, it's fun or whatever. And say some provocative things that I may or may not agree with. First of all, I certainly don't want to make it seem like it's implied that the act of any sort of digital reconstruction or documentation is any sort of replacement for things like foreign policy decisions that, you know, by any sort of bad actors, and probably maybe especially the United States, that might endanger you know, these things to begin with, even in terms of, you know, not supporting climate change legislation resulting in things like famines that cause a lot of these conflicts in a larger, you know, global sense. So with that sort of said, I think this question of preservation versus documentation is really interesting, and I've been sitting here trying to think of even how I would define that relationship between those two things. It seems like preservation has some sort of active, it as a word has more aura in a certain way, or there's an active quality about it, but I'm not quite sure. I haven't sorted that out in my mind yet. But what I would say, you know, just to be provocative, is, you know, how much, what are we preserving? How much do these stones actually matter in some way, shape, or form? And what can be carried on in a digital form that makes any sense? I mean, why is it this physical manifestation of that we're attached to? I think that there is something important to be attached to there, but we have to at least be able to talk about what it is and if any of that's transferable to a digital form. And so I would, you know, in terms of one of the things that our project's doing, like I alluded to before, was talking about active engagement in this stuff. And if there's a silver lining on some people going in and blowing this stuff up, is that more people care about this site than ever have, probably. That's arguable, but, you know, there's national attention on this thing. So I would argue that the conversation has changed a little bit, and this isn't just in terms of cultural heritage preservation, but all sorts of digital art objects. Poor Mr. Benjamin probably in this day and age doesn't apply in the same way, and the only objects that have aura are the ones that can be reproduced and disseminated to people. And things that are, you know, analog singular copies that are sitting somewhere may not have the same aura in today's, you know, world that they used to. And so that's unpacking his old paper is a whole. I'm sort of glazing over a lot of the more intricate parts of his argument, but
I'm surprised that the sort of artists in the room are so comfortable with the death of the artist. That the reason that
I'm not an artist, just
okay.
Yeah, I had to be, because then I had to be okay with, because when I was working on the project, I did so much work in using like resin, which is the closest to the stone, and having it just like beautiful, transparent, whatever. And then once I was releasing the file, I knew I was going to be also in another level heartbroken, because I was just going to see a lot of small, terribly printed King Uthals everywhere. You know, so that's it. That is the death of my part right there.
I think it's more that the definition of what art is changing very drastically.
Yes, we could talk
and
about
so it's like
forever.
I mean, we're going to need another 4 hours, but I mean, people's conception of you, like the what is art thing, like I hate to even like bring that up, but what does a creative practitioner that can be called an artist or someone that thinks in a creative and artistic way look like nowadays? And it's not how it used to look. And people haven't quite, you know, it's a lot of different fragmented things now that work in a lot of spaces that are interdisciplinary and things like that. So,
I know both Mike and Chinzia would like to add brief comments, and then we'll come back to the audience.
I want to add a little bit to what Barry, I again agree very much with what Barry is saying, and Mauritian. And I want to circle back to the last question where we left before the break. Yes, digital documentation in no way replaces the original artifacts. It's just a very different job. It's our job
is the job that we chose. But a good example to respond to that question, what is it worth preserving? What is it that we can physically preserve? It is certainly good to have the chance to preserve digitally and have documentation, context documentation for monuments that are being destroyed. And of course, archaeologists are not the main stakeholder to physically protect, avoid wars, avoid famine, avoid big problems, political or natural, like global warming. But is that a scale of values? We think of monuments and physical heritage as stones, as palaces or tombs, mummies. How about intangible heritage? Is that a scale of value? Should I struggle to preserve a palace? How about a dying language? As an Italian, when I moved here, I had a pretty strict and narrow idea of archaeology. I've been working in Africa for many years, and I'm Italian. And when I came here, I had no idea. We have such a dumb narrative about Native Americans. You have no idea how dumb the narrative that we receive in Europe in schools about Native American history is. And when I came here, I came in contact with an incredibly interesting and endangered heritage, people, elders that are dying, and languages, ancient languages that are dying with them because young people are not learning them. That's nothing physical about that. Is that less important because it is not made of stone? How do we tackle that? I think that we have a great chance with digital technologies of thinking about heritage in a much larger way than what is made of stone. And again, I started saying, in no way this replaces the job that we and the responsibility that we have in saving our physical heritage. But there is a lot of complexity that we're trying to work on, and I think that if each of us try to do a good job in the very small space of the possibility that we have, in a very small space of an archaeological project, in a very small space of a digital documentation project, we can manage to scrap together a little money to create a record for posterity, to save a language out of Alaska. And of course, there needs to be big efforts in preserving a physical heritage in whatever form that comes. But it's a very large thing. It's tangible and intangible, and I think that in this very complex world, digital technologies have definitely added and not diminished.
I think it's
possibility.
I think it's helpful to kind of elucidating to turn the question around and say, does the physical site replace the digital artifact?
Thanks, Mike. And then
what
we'll
are the affordances there? Like, no, it doesn't replace it because you've lost something there too. If you were to delete all the digital copies, then it's not a dichotomy.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I think Professor Porter, helpfully raises this issue of authenticity, right? Is losing these things matter, and I think it does matter. I mean, part of what prompts, I think, this conference and people's interest is this, sad and spectacular intentional destruction of things that I think people around the world recognize as being of worldwide heritage significance. And there'd been some discussion earlier on about why that happens. I think we could point to a number of things, like it's intended, that spectacle of destruction, to promote further conflict, to challenge shared values, so that when people around the world do recognize, I think not everyone, but there's sort of wide international recognition of some of the value of Iraqi and Syrian and other cultural monuments. These extremist voices want to foment and propel religious and ethnic strife. And it's really frightening and distressing to me to see voices in American politics that seem to propel ethnic tensions and religious tensions, and they're appealing to some of the worst inclinations of people around the world. And I think if there's one thing we can try to do is to take this as an educational opportunity, as sort of an opportunity to really go back and reinforce what we all see as the importance, the human importance and the human values of archaeology and cultural history. So even though we may not be able to restore a perfectly authentic replica of these monuments, digital documentation is something, even if it's a small step in the right direction. It's certainly helpful.
I just want to add to this line. So when ISIS marched to Palmyra over 4 days, the world was watching. I was on the phone with people in Palmyra telling me ISIS is marching towards the city, and they were packing stuff at the museum, and Damascus was supposed to send trucks, and some of the stuff got moved, and a lot of it remained in the museum, destroyed by ISIS. Right, 2 American archaeologists, one of them who worked in training the military in Iraq, and one who was here this morning, called DOD and said, could you do something? And I said, no, we have no orders, talk to the White House. And then later on, of course, just 2 days after Palmyra they did the Abu Sayyaf raid in Deir ez-Zor. They had orders for that. They did not care about preserving a World Heritage Site, a shared heritage. They cared about killing one man, or they wanted to capture him, but they had to kill him, right? And then the whole information about the Abu Sayyaf horde and all of that. Later on, I was having dinner with a friend of mine who's a journalist and a big supporter of President Obama, and I said, "You're president, I am angry," and I said all kinds of things. And he said, "Oh, my president did not have any American archaeologist or Syrian or Iraqi rally to him to protect heritage." He said this to me. He said, "Did you do something like that?" So again, this is a question of did we really rally politicians around the world to preserve the authentic, the original sites and artifacts? This is again.
Thanks. If we come back to the audience, yes, back. Yes.
No, the gentleman has been raising his
next, yes. Sorry, her first and then you next.
Sorry. Well, thank you very much for all the information provided. What worries me about this, as much as I'm excited about digital archiving and digital reproduction of the artifacts, what worries me is manipulation of these data. Because obviously, as Mrs. Alahiari mentioned, there is no public library, digital public library of the actual scanned documents available for the general public to see. So let's say, for instance, Mrs. Alahiari, with the scanned documents that she was able to reproduce, the monument that she did, she would have manipulated that. And now all over the Google, you see those pictures, those images, and that just rewrites the history. This is really frightening, and I think the very first thing that perhaps the archaeology, the world of archaeologists should do is try to create some kind of regulations on these entities that are trying. Obviously, they're reaching out to some organizations to get grants because this is a very costly project. They cannot do it on their own. They're getting money from someone. Perhaps there are some regulations, and if there are not, there should be some regulations passed through the legislation to pass it through all these organizations that are making funds available for the archaeologists to go on, or any other entity that's going to scan these documents, to make these documents available, to make these digital images publicly available for everyone to see. So if anybody wants to go from artistic point of view, wants to recreate and modify the actual image, people can still see the actual image and won't be fooled by the artificial image that is made, and there is no actual vision of it.
So does anyone?
Can I respond
Yes,
to this?
please.
One of the things that I've done is to include all the process, right, of this recreation when I release the files, which you can, if you just look up the project on Rhizome, which just include the process of recreation of these files, right? So again, just being completely transparent in the process of the way it was recreated, etc. With these files, there are no 3D scans available anyway, right? So it's the only way that any reconstruction could happen is from images that are these like 2D images that are available, right? So yeah, plus I'm not working as an archaeologist. I don't think that's my job to, and again, I'm working as an artist, and that has been my position. So, and that's important, right? Because if I was gonna come here and say that I am an archaeologist or I'm reconstructing these things in an accurate way and this should be used, you know, as like an original thing. So, and that position has been, like, that gesture has been really important as a part of the project. No, I'm just making it clear that is something that in the process of the project I've thought about a lot, and I've talked to many archaeologists. But you would be amazed of the number of emails that I've received from like people who are Assyrian, people who are from Syria, etc., being really excited about this amount of work being done because it's the least that could be done, right? And that kind of response, I think, has been the most important for me. Just knowing that.
Sorry, we're just going to let some of our other panelists respond here.
Well, I can say that there are standards, in fact, and it is far from being perfect, but there are international standards that people that do this type of job follow to ensure that images and digital products that are released, produced, have that the images and media, that have been produced as a result of a research project or a digital documentation project, in fact respond to those standards. Is very incredibly difficult to have these standards being universal. There is quite a debate both in Europe and in the States on what are the best standards, how we can share common formats, file formats, so that information how to create portable formats for media that embed information about that document any process that has been done on that image. If an image has been retouched, changed in Photoshop, that record, that documentation should be in the image. And if the image is a raw file that came out of a camera and is untouched, then it represents some fact or a piece of reality. It should be, that information should travel with the file itself. So there is a lot of debate and effort that goes into what are the best standards, how we can share formats, portable formats, in a way that you can use images in different ways and you can access the information that is in the images. It's huge and is, again, very far from perfect, but it's not like there are standards. There are ways in which you can tell this is an untouched, an original file, and this has been retouched because of an artist who wanted to do a beautiful piece of art, and that should definitely happen. But yeah, there are.
Thank you. We have one question at the back, yes.
Well, besides the institutional restrictions and the proprietary issues, I think digital technology is a tool in your hands to gain the support of the public and create awareness all over the world, so people can say, oh, this is the thing that my fellow compatriots or my friends destroyed, and this will create a support for the fundings as well as protection of the sites in the areas that are lack of knowledge is a major issue. So I believe should be public, and when people see what is being damaged and destroyed, they will be on the side of the archaeologists and governments to support and fund it. rather than, of course, the tool that in some areas might be used very often, in some not. But with the changes in the world, not every kid has a phone, can check things and then view things, and somehow we teach people that these sites are important for the people and for them as well when they grow up. So that's a part of educated people like you who have the key to people's brains and eyes to give them information and knowledge to support your efforts as well as the governmental institutions who are funding these.
Thank you. We're running a little bit short on time, so I'd like to take one more audience question and then give our panelists an opportunity to perhaps reflect on any of the conversations before we end. So yeah, Stephanie.
Yeah, one of the things that came up in this morning's panel and then again in the keynote at lunch today was this association between cultural heritage and the state. And this was specifically referencing the situation in Syria and then in Egypt. And I'm wondering, for those of you that are doing really local community archaeology projects, how pervasive do you think this opinion is? Is it something that's sort of just under the surface and that's being exacerbated by, or in regions where there are conflicts with the state specifically? Or is this something that we see? I mean, I have such a wide array of archaeologists from a diverse geographical region. So, I don't know, maybe, I mean, especially like Dana and Allison. I mean, Allison, you work with people who have been invested in sites for multiple generations, and Dana, you're working with teenagers. So, I mean, how do you guys feel on your project specifically about who's really seeing ownership in the heritage?
So I think that's really pervasive. In the two contexts where I work, you see that feeling sort of in an intermediary stage. So if in Egypt we're seeing people say this museum is the government or belongs to the government, at least in Petra especially, the people that I talk to and work with see all of the economic benefit from Petra, which attracts so many tourists each year, each of whom, if you're a foreigner, you pay 100 JD, I think, to get in now, or 70 JD, $100, 70 JD, something like that. And so there's a lot of money coming in to Petra, and so when you ask them, you don't even have to ask them, they'll just say the money is going to the king, and even though they love the king and support the king, they still think that this is being siphoned away from them, and that they should be seeing some benefit from this this venture. And at Çatalhöyük, where tourism is just kicking off, it was only given World Heritage status in 2012. You talk to people and they're sort of waiting. They're waiting to see where the economic benefit goes. They're skeptical that they're going to see any of it. So I think where I work, you're seeing that where that tension starts to be applied and how that feeling starts to emerge. And so, I mean, I can definitely foresee a future down the road in which people do associate their remains securely with the state. But right now, they see, I mean, in Petra, the Bedouins were only moved out of the site in 1985 and settled into a permanent community then. So it hasn't been that long since they were living in the caves, and that was their home. But as those pressures are put on more and more, you start to see this kind of this anger and this feeling of divestment and this feeling of being disengaged and forced aside brewing more and more. So I think it's a process that you can see red flags along the way.
I was just going to add, similarly, in following up on your comments and those earlier from Dr. Hanna too, I think in our case, with our young people that are living and working in Akko, it's less an issue of an association of archaeological sites with the state, but also there is a sense of disenfranchisement that this is something that's not for me, and also a lot of misinformation about what the sites are and their relevance. So one of the things that we do with each batch of students, we say, okay, well, what do these sites mean to you? Tell us, your perspective on the history of these sites. What does it mean for you that you live in a UNESCO World Heritage Site? And the answer is, what is a UNESCO World Heritage Site? We've never been told. No one's actually explained to us, or not explained, because it sounds like it's, again, very top-down, but that's never been made relevant. And what we're really trying to do actively is to shift that ownership back to the local community, give them a stake in the future of it, and let them dictate the terms of their own interaction, and give them a sense of ownership in the future with these projects, such as the youth center and otherwise. I think that's a really critical point. So.
I just want to add something. If you want an excellent article to read about that kind of thing, read Caroline Steele, Who Hasn't Eaten Cherries with the Devil? I make my students read it. It articulates the problems with the field and that. And I also make them read an example about Çatalhöyük to see like it is doable. You know, with all the difficulties and with all the thing, and I articulate something that, you know, people, archaeologists, when we talk about Çatalhöyük, say, oh, we're not Ian Hodder to be able to raise money to do that kind of work. But, you know, his honesty about, and his, you know, the approach where they have, it's in the right place. And I think you will get somewhere with that kind of approach.
Thank you. Well, we have just a few minutes left, so maybe I would just like to invite our panelists, we can start with Soror, to make a few concluding remarks.
I just wanted to say that all of these talks that we are having today is great, but as a side effect of everything happening is the people in those areas. For example, in the area that I work, now tuberculosis is so widely, you know, spread, trachoma, all of these diseases, skin disease, and diseases that are, you know, particular to arid areas are popping out. So are we going to dismiss all of those? This is a question, only a question. Are we going to dismiss all of these problems? And we didn't have tuberculosis in Iran for many, many years, and now we have it. And other disease. So where would we stop with our support or work or whatever it is? Where do we stop? That's it.
Any other concluding comments here?
Just a couple of thoughts about what the gentleman was mentioning in the back there, and other questions from the audience. I know just sitting on a panel with you know, colleagues from Iran and from Syria, and having worked myself in Yemen for quite a number of years, it's just absolutely heart-wrenching, you know, to see the human costs in recent times. And, you know, a couple of people raised, you know, what can we do? I think it's not only scholars but all stakeholders in general, and even interested people in the audience. You know, there's an element of comparative research that can be helpful, I think. You know, public diplomacy, public outreach, education. You know, when I think of the Middle East today, what really is troubling to me is the countries like Turkey, Jordan, the United Arab Emirates, Oman, that up to now, you know, many of these places have been very peaceful and hopefully remain that way, but are increasingly a point of anxiety, because, you know, what we really don't want to see is further kind of spread of conflict. And so if we can try to you know, highlight this shared sense of human interests around cultural heritage, I think that can be, you know, one strong tool. I think in a sense we hold some really powerful tools, some really key tools to rally people around a shared peaceful future. But yet we also at the same time kind of feel very powerless to watch the destruction and the human costs go on and not be resolved. So, you know, I don't know what the answer is exactly, but certainly I think people widely in the public underestimate the significance of humanistic research at universities, social sciences research at universities, and the importance in nationalism and identity of culture or heritage. So to the extent that we can wield that as a force for good, I think is an important thing to keep thinking about.
Well, on that very poignant note, I think it's time for us to conclude our afternoon session. So I would like to really enthusiastically thank all of our panelists for their participation today. Thank you.